So, what happens when a journalist, someone whose entire job is to report the news, suddenly stops believing in it? Today, we're diving into the personal and political transformation of Brandi Kruse, a journey that she says took her from being a mainstream reporter to a red-pilled independent. Okay, let's just kick this off with a powerful statement from Brandi Kruse herself. I had to stop taking the media seriously, and then I had to stop taking the president literally, and life just became a lot better. I mean, that one sentence is really at the heart of her entire story. This wasn't just some small change of mind. For her, it was a complete rewiring of how she viewed the world. So, how does a mainstream TV journalist in Seattle, a city she calls deeply liberal, come to see herself as red-pilled and cured of what she calls Trump derangement syndrome? And you've likely heard that term before. It's often used by critics to describe what they see as an intense, over-the-top, negative reaction to Donald Trump. Well, for more than 10 years, Kruse was right in the middle of the Seattle TV news world. And looking back on it now, she describes that whole environment as a toxic echo chamber. She believes it heavily influenced her worldview, and that's a really crucial piece of context for understanding where her journey began. Here's her point. She says it was only after she got out, both physically and professionally, that she felt she could really start to think for herself. In fact, in late 2021, she quit her TV news job to launch her own independent show. She says that move was absolutely essential for her to reevaluate everything she believed. But it wasn't just about leaving her job. There were specific major news events that she says caused her to seriously question the integrity of the very institution she had been a part of for her entire career. According to Kruse, two things were really the tipping point. First, the media's coverage of the 2020 Seattle riots. She was on the ground covering them and felt the violence she was seeing with her own eyes was being deliberately minimized. And at the same time, she was really troubled by what she saw as the media's failure to seriously question the government's actions during the pandemic. So this growing skepticism she had about the riots, about the pandemic coverage, it led her to reevaluate pretty much everything, especially the media's coverage of President Trump. In her own words, it was like a veil was just ripped off. And this whole new perspective led her to double down on a story she says she'd already been covering for years, but now with a completely renewed sense of urgency, documenting left-wing extremism. And her reporting on this was not from a distance. Kruse talks about a long history of direct personal confrontations while covering protests. We're talking about being mobbed with her crew, being personally assaulted on different occasions, and even an incident where she says she was targeted with wasp killer outside a federal building. She came to view herself as public enemy number one for Antifa in the Pacific Northwest. Now, this right here is the core of her argument. It's what she sees as a glaring double standard. She contrasts the response to the months-long occupation and riots in Seattle with the response to the single-day event of January 6th. On one hand, she argues, you had an event downplayed by officials and called the Summer of Love, while on the other, an event that was met with the full force of the federal government. For Kruse, there's no better example of this perceived absurdity than the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or CHAZ, which was later renamed CHOP. I mean, this was a 6-block area of Seattle that protesters just took over after police completely abandoned their East Precinct building. She describes getting a call from her photographer on the scene, confirming what her sources had been saying. The police were evacuating. And even as officials were denying it, she was watching it happen in real time. Cops loading up U-Haul trucks, taking award plaques off the walls, essentially just ceding territory to protesters. And then the chaos just escalated. She describes watching a live stream as a car pulled up, the trunk was popped open to reveal a cache of AR-15s, and a man who called himself the CHOP warlord started handing out weapons to strangers, some of whom, she says, appeared to be just kids. And then they started patrolling the police-free zone. Her nonstop reporting on this violence, which she felt was being totally ignored by mainstream news, eventually got the attention of the highest levels of government. And that led to a very unexpected invitation. A roundtable at the White House with President Trump and the heads of federal law enforcement. So after all those years of trying to get the media to take this issue seriously, what was her message when she finally had the ear of the most powerful people in the country? Well, she says her focus had shifted completely by that point. She basically explained that she was done trying to convince the public through the media. Her appeal was for direct federal action. She asked them to declare Antifa a terror organization, to use federal resources to prosecute activists, and to take over cases from local police departments that she felt were either overwhelmed or just unwilling to act. And to really hammer her point home, she drew a direct comparison to the investigation of January 6th. She argued that these incredibly powerful federal tools, like using cell phone location data to track people down years after the fact, were being used extensively in one case, but not, in her view, to investigate ongoing left-wing extremist activity.
But this advocacy and her ideological shift didn't just happen in a vacuum. Of course they didn't. They came with some pretty significant personal and professional consequences. The fallout, she says, was immediate, and it was painful. She lost subscribers to her independent show. She was accused of changing her views for money or for fame. But the biggest cost, she says, was personal. A huge falling out with a close family member, a conflict that she admits left her in tears. In a moment of self-reflection, she acknowledges that this feeling of alienation she now gets from former allies, it's given her a new perspective. She says it's kind of similar to how she might have treated Trump supporters in the past, even calling her own previous attitude sanctimonious and condescending. Ultimately, Brandi Kruse's journey is more than just one journalist's story. It really taps into a much bigger narrative about the erosion of trust in our core institutions, like the media and the government. And it leaves all of us with a critical question to think about. In an age of information silos and deep polarization, what happens when individuals feel like the only way to find the truth is to just abandon the system entirely and tell the story themselves?